Hello and welcome to Gendering Geopolitics, my short series where I have quick 10-minute conversations with women around the world who are doing amazing things. My name is Emily Prey and I'm a senior analyst at the New Lines Institute in Washington, D.C. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with the amazing Rula Jebreal, an author, foreign policy analyst, and professor about U.S. foreign policy and the international rules-based order. Thank you so much for joining me, Rula.
Thank you, Emily.
So just to get us started off, how is the international rules-based order threatened by some of the U.S. allies and their actions?
So when President Biden and his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, call out Vladimir Putin after he Novichoked his political opponent, Navalny, or they call out the Communist Party in China and call out Xi Jinping for his human rights violation, especially what he's doing against the Muslim minority in Xinjiang, the concentration camp, etc. These authoritarian regimes are not taking him seriously because what undermined President Biden is actually his own allies. Israel, what the Israeli government is doing in the occupied territories, bombing to oblivion families, hospitals, schools, pharmacies in Gaza, or enacting a supremacist agenda in the occupied territories. What's happening in East Jerusalem currently is ethnic cleansing, is violation of human rights and international law. And yet, the United States is still committed to protecting, enabling Israel apartheid regime, not only actively trying to undermine any effort to hold Israel accountable in front of the international community by vetoing any resolution of the United Nations, but also by funding, subsidizing the military occupation. I mean, Israel received $3.8 billion. The United States actively is participant in violation of human rights. On the other side, you have Al-Sisi in Egypt, who receives almost $2 billion, who is an authoritarian thug who is jailing, as we speak, 60,000 political prisoners. Then you have the Saudi regime and you have the Crown Prince who's sending death squads, who's killing journalists, activists, kidnapping people from overseas, trying to bring them home to torture them. So we're seeing these allies, and the double standard does not work anymore. President Biden cannot claim to defend democracy overseas while enabling and subsidizing and protecting authoritarianism. It's the moment of choosing. It's the moment of either you choose those people who Donald Trump called my favorite dictators, like the Saudi regime, Mohammed bin Salman, but also the dictator in Egypt, Al-Sisi, or you choose actually democracy, human rights, and truly defend and create allies, strengthen allies who are committed to defending democracies at home and overseas. We cannot have it both ways. And I think one of the reasons in Europe why European allies are confused, utterly confused, and don't trust the United States anymore, because they know that, we don't put our mouth where we put our money. Our money is somewhere else. Our money is backing these authoritarian regimes.
So one of Biden's biggest priorities has been democracy promotion as part of his administration. But many of these allies that you've mentioned, like Saudi Arabia, they're anti-democratic. So will the U.S. ever prioritize human rights and women's rights and democracy promotion over geopolitical considerations in this region, in these regions?
Well, in these regions, thank you, Emily, for this question. Actually, this is the core of the issue. The United States foreign policy have always been a double standard. We promote democracy in some places and we promote authoritarianism in other places. In Europe, we're committed to democracy. In the Middle East, we're committed to protecting dictators. The problem with that kind of agenda and double standard and delusional foreign policy, the regime change agenda came back home to haunt the United States of America. Look what happened with January 6th. Donald Trump and the Republican Party are utterly committed. They are becoming an authoritarian movement, an anti-democratic movement, who are willing to use violence against American citizens to stay in power. This is a kind of policy that we enacted in the Middle East. It's coming back home to haunt the United States. It's not anymore about the Palestinians or the Pakistani or the Syrians. It's about America's survival and America's democracy, the protection of America's democracy itself. January 6th was only the beginning. The fact that nobody was held accountable, and I'm not talking about the white supremacists who invaded and stormed the Capitol and killed people and attacked the police. I'm talking about the people who instigated for the January 6th terrorist attack to happen. None of those were held accountable. Exactly the same way Mohammed bin Salman was never held accountable for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So again, what country, what kind of commitment do we need to have? And President Biden was elected and he has one mandate. It's to defend democracy at home and overseas. It's to defend the rule of law. Multi-ethnic democracy is so relevant to the United States. It's so important and it's threatened. It's under attack. If he doesn't defend it at home and if he doesn't defend it overseas, there will be another Donald Trump and the risk is greater than ever. There is a campaign that is being waged by the Republican Party on one side, by their financial backers, Toyota and others, and the Mercer family, these billionaires who are willing to bankroll authoritarianism. But also there's another side of this equation, which is the most dangerous side. There's a campaign of mass information, disinformation, propaganda that's being day in and day out propagated. They're radicalizing American citizens. They're brainwashing American citizens to turn on their fellow citizens, on democracy, to reach the point where they're willing to kill and die in order to stay in power. They're using racism, xenophobia, and they're even attacking the military. We see it with Fox News. We see it with many other platforms. I just want to remind everybody that the Holocaust did not start with a killing. It started with words. It started with division. It started with hate speech. And this is how people got radicalized. This is how we got to see an entire nation turning on their own citizens. This is how it started. And I fear it's happening again, not only in China, not only in Russia, it's happening in the United States. And that's why we need to be very careful. It's alarming what's happening.
It's really important to highlight the power of words and the power of propaganda and how many, horrible things have happened throughout history because of that, and to look in real time to see what's happening because of the fake news and the propaganda that's going around now. Just to shift, I want to talk about traditional foreign policy analysis, because traditionally, many analysts would argue that the benefits of allying with human rights abusers, countries who severely restrict women and minorities, that it outweighs the costs, because the US does need allies in different parts of the world to promote its foreign policy objectives, regardless of how those countries treat their own people. So what is the solution here? And how can we move forward with a foreign policy analysis and US foreign policy that has a more of a gendered lens and feminist perspective?
I mean, some of these people, and I call them delusional, because they need to tell me one objective. What did we get from authoritarianism? I mean, they really need to point out through facts, through data, through numbers, what did we achieve through authoritarianism? The Middle East has been governed by authoritarian rulers for the last 45 years. They gave us unemployment, radicalization, desperation, refugee crisis. I mean, somebody needs to point out to what did authoritarian stability produce except nothing, zero. So I am sorry, either you promote democracy, but this is, again, it goes back to the idea, to the basic idea that is haunting America's democracy itself, that not all people were born equal, that people like myself, women, who have different skin tone, who belong to different ethnic group, who happen to be Muslim, are not born equal. This is the basis of white supremacies. This is the first law, the first time that blood and race was instituted as a law to divide people was actually in Europe. So the region, or let's say the continent that gave us the best philosopher, the best intellectual, also gave us death camps and Nazis and fascism. So I'm not willing to accept that the Middle East, the people in the Middle East or in Africa don't deserve democracy. We deserve democracy. We deserve human rights. We deserve equal rights, exactly like anybody in the United States or in Europe. My skin color shouldn't exclude me, or my religion or my ethnicity or even my gender should not exclude me from my rights. And I have the right to live as a free woman, exactly like millions of people. Everybody in the region, in the Middle East, who've been protesting for decades, they've been asking nothing except freedom, democracy. But what did we give them? We keep enabling these dictators around the Middle East, like El-Sisi, who happen to be a mediocre dictator, who actually subject women who've been raped to virginity tests. These are our allies. Then he comes to Europe and he gets an award from the French president. I mean, we need to be ashamed at this point, because what we are doing, we are creating a narrative that this is what people in the region deserve. And the other side of that narrative, this is why radicals are exploiting the fact that, the West is hypocritical about their commitment to democracy and to human rights. So we cannot have it both ways. Again, it's the time of choosing. Donald Trump made it clear that he wants to be El-Sisi for the United States. He wants to be Putin for the American people. So it's time for President Biden and Blinken and all of the foreign policy establishment in the United States to understand that they need really to defend democracy everywhere, not only against China or against Russia, or use it to basically play the power game, who's the most superpower and who's more committed. They need actually to promote democracy everywhere, and not only promote it through the foreign aid or their military establishment, or through everything, every medium. Otherwise, I think it will undermine the United States itself. And I fear, and I say this again and again, I fear that these dictators are being emboldened. Mohammed bin Salman, who chopped up a journalist in an embassy, when President Biden said that he will hold him accountable and he didn't follow through on that, guess what? He starts threatening the United Nations investigator, Agnes Calamari. They threatened her with death. They actually sent her death threats. So he's not ashamed of what he did. He doesn't regret what he did. It was not a mistake. It's a deliberate strategy. And if we refuse to hold them accountable, they will double down. Exactly like Saddam Hussein doubled down in his crimes. Mohammed bin Salman will double down on his crimes. And then, the Chinese regime will continue their genocidal campaign against the Uyghurs. And they will look at the United States and they will point out to the double standards and to the hypocrisy.
Thank you so much for joining me on Gendering Geopolitics today, Rula. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you, Emily.